Yes, towards the end of your talk, you mentioned that what you were talking about relates to the federal system of government that we have in this country, which is rapidly breaking down. It occurred to me that there aren't very many alternatives to that system. The only ones I know of are what they have in most foreign countries, which is their equivalent of state and local governments are in effect agencies of the national government. Are there any other serious proposals to alter the federal system?
No, not that I'm aware of. You know, it's embedded in our Constitution, and the differences that exist in so many respects from state to state are so extraordinary that it's probably politically impossible to change it dramatically. But I think that it's not impossible to say, okay, maybe we ought to look at each of these things that government gets involved in and say maybe it should be clearly the responsibility of states and local governments, and therefore if you want the benefits of a particular, you know, generic kind of public service, then you're going to have to pay the taxes at the local level to get it. But if you want health care, let the feds pay for it. 40% of Medicaid expenditures are paid for people who are already on Medicare. And I made a proposal when I was lieutenant governor. I didn't mean anything, but I suggested that if, though the people who got Medicaid payments who are already on Medicare, those services ought to be paid for part of Medicare instead of by Medicaid, that would have alleviated the state budget crisis in and of itself. I mean, it wasn't realistic politically, I understand that. So, I mean, I think you just have to start getting people in elective office to think about, you know, who does what, because we got the worst of all worlds now. As you know, the federal government passes mandates and says, and provides seductions. And it's very hard for a politician. No state is required to have Medicaid. If a state were to vote, the state legislature and the governor were to say, we don't want to be part of the Medicaid program, we'll save a hell of a lot of money, they're free constitutionally to do that. But politically, I mean, they wouldn't last through the next election, right? So the federal government has a system of mandates, a system of bribes, in the best sense of the word, and states do the same thing with local governments. And you know, we've been very, very lucky in this country. You know, we had a depression, and we had a major social crisis because of segregation, and we faced a Cold War, and faced a war against the Nazis, and we solved those problems. And I believe we can solve this one too. I don't think it's all going to come crashing in, but it requires a level of political leadership at all levels and in both parties. And that is only going to come to pass if we have a more active citizen, which is why I like coming to the league.
Jane, did you?
No, I just wanted to ask, please repeat the question, because sometimes we can't.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Laura?
Sure.
There's one thing that you didn't mention, which has been scaring me, and I want you to assure me that it's something I don't have to be afraid of. And that's the increasing privatization that's going on. So many of our prisons have been sold to private outfits, so then the government and the people are no longer involved as to what occurs there. It's happened in the military. Whenever we find out the real horror stories of what went on in Iraq or Afghanistan, it's frequently not things that are perpetrated by our regular troops, but these specially hired ones. And now we have it more and more with education and with schools. And sometimes they're charter schools, sometimes it's private schools. And we know what's happened, for example, for all of the colleges which are being paid enormous amounts of money and not turning out well-educated students, and these are the returning servicemen who are caught up in this bind. So it may not add up to the total billions you've been talking about, but I see it a trend which, as far as I'm concerned, has nothing to do with democracy and our form of government.
Well,
Can you repeat the question?
the question was,
Yeah.
should one be alarmed by the degree of privatization of
Right.
public services? That's a vast question, as you know, Laura, and let me say three things. One, a lot of privatization is a political matter only, and in the sense that if you have a toll road that you charge money for and you can finance it privately, should you do that? I was asked when I was chairman of the MTA, should we privatize the subway system and the bus system? I got this question all the time, particularly at the Wall Street Journal. And I'd say, okay, well, what would you do if you owned the bus system? Well, we'd look at the routes that were underutilized and we'd shut them down and save money. I said, great idea. I said, then your maids would not be able to get to work in the morning. I mean, some of it is silly business. I don't know about the military stuff. I have no expertise at that. As far as education is concerned, there are two separate points I want to make. I don't happen, I'm not an expert at it. I have a former wife who is, and I have a lot of respect for her view on the subject, and I'm persuaded she's right. I think charter schools are a lot of bunk. And are hurting public education significantly. But I want to call your attention to something I didn't mention. You know, there are 3 kids in the United States who go to public universities for every one in a private university. And one of the victims of this state budget crisis over the last decade and increasing are public universities. And tuitions are going up at frightening rates. The effort to recruit more and more students from abroad who can pay the full tuition rate in order to keep I mean, there's nothing wrong with recruiting them, but if you have fewer and fewer Americans who can afford to pay it, you're filling your enrollment with foreign students. That doesn't augur too well for economic growth in the United States either. So it's a serious problem.